Hi, my name is Tracy Marie. I'm a graduate student for Fitness and Wellness Leadership. This video is for my Biomechanics and Resistance Training course, where I will be discussing 3 exercise movements focusing on the upper body, the core, and the lower body, and my client's specific needs. My client is a 60-year-old female with no major health concerns and good general health. She is currently not on any exercise program, but tries to be active on her own. Based on her needs, I developed a program by starting with National Posture Institute's training matrix order with beginner exercises targeting the upper body, core, and lower body to establish better posture and more flexibility in all 3 zones, with the intent to establish a strong foundation to work her way up to more advanced exercises. When going over her needs analysis, I selected the 3 exercises based on what muscle groups should be trained, what basic energy source needs to be trained, and what type of muscle action should be trained. I also looked at what her primary sites of injury were and any prior injury history. It is also important during the needs analysis for a new client to find out what their needs are for muscle strength, hypertrophy, endurance, power, speed, agility, flexibility, body composition, balance, and coordination to apply to the program developed. I designed her program to start with strength to correct posture and flexibility, and from there to work on other areas that would include muscle hypertrophy and body composition, physical fitness for daily living and aging, while targeting the anaerobic and aerobic energy systems. I noticed when evaluating her while warming up that she tired pretty easily, so I took note of that, and I would want to incorporate light cardio a few days a week to help build her anaerobic system while we focus on her, to help build her aerobic system while we focus on her anaerobic system. She has some prior experience with exercising on her own, but no proper knowledge of how to correctly perform exercise movements or where to begin in a correct sequenced order. For flexibility, her knowledge is limited, but she has some. She's done yoga in the past on her own and is familiar with some basic concepts. My client has an injury to the sesamoid, so therefore I was careful to make sure that exercises we start with aren't putting too much pressure on that area of her foot. Due to her age, background, current physical fitness, posture, and injury history, I chose to start with exercises that are for beginners that will allow her to develop strength for basic movements and to allow her to work on realigning some slight postural issues. When I evaluated her posture, I found her right shoulder to be lower than the left and quite a bit of stiffness in her upper thoracic region. My client, I found, is a visual learner, so I developed some handouts for her to refer to, along with me physically showing her each exercise. The handouts are valuable to the client so that she can bring them home after I am no longer with her to refer to. It can often be hard to remember every detail of each exercise that was gone over during a session. So when instructing an exercise for the first time, it is important to explain the exercise to the client in several ways so that they understand it clearly. For my client, I printed out instructions, as I said, and images of the exercises she was to learn. Then I explained to her the exercise movements, what muscles were going to be focused on, and pointed them out on the diagram and also on her. I explained the importance of posture, showed her where her posture was slightly off, and explained how each exercise movement focuses on the 4 points of posture for correction. I also explained how she can practice standing tall, contracting her shoulder blades and abdominals outside of any exercise movement, alone at home 3 times a day for about 5 minutes. and this will help her also build proper posture. Um, I explained how the National Posture Institute's 4 points of posture are important for every exercise movement and will help correct any imbalances. I also, in the beginning, before we start any exercise movement, explain the 4 C's: concentration, contraction, control, and correction to focus on during each exercise. It is important to introduce this concept to a client in the beginning before they practice the movements so that they know what to focus on during each movement. First, I show the client how to perform the movement without the machine, pointing out proper posture, alignment, muscles that are to be engaged, and then I perform the exercise so that she can see me do it. I also show where any things can be performed incorrectly at this time. After that, I have her kind of say back to me what she's going to do and what she is to focus on, and then I have her get into the preparation phase of the exercise movement. Here I have her pause before starting so I can evaluate her posture and make any corrections that need to be made, and explain again one more time the proper movements and what muscles she is going to be looking to feel to engage. I then have her start the exercise. While she is in the central phase of the exercise movement, I point out anything I notice that she's doing incorrectly. And this is where a client really appreciates the feedback because they can't know or feel the difference between what's right or wrong until you show them and they can really feel it. Then it triggers and they know what to feel, and that is where they can start building that muscle motor neuron connection, which is muscle memory. I also explain why she is starting at such low weights. It is important to be able to do 15 to 20 reps at low weight 2 to 3 times a week to build muscle memory and really ace the movements before going on to a higher weight or more advanced exercise to build muscle hypertrophy. Often people are gung-ho and they just want to do an exercise with heavy weights, and it's really important that you don't do that, especially if you don't know the proper exercise form and movement. The low weights really allows you to build that muscle memory connection so that you can build up to doing higher weights in the proper form. For core strength exercises, I would have her get up to doing about 50 reps before I would move her on to any more advanced exercise movement. So the 3 exercise movements I selected for my client was the seated cable row, the trunk flexion, and the bodyweight squat. By acing these exercises, it allows my client to understand proper posture, muscle engagement, and to build base strength to be able to safely and effectively advance to other exercises. I also integrated in upper core and lower body stretches for my client to learn and practice before, during, and after the exercises. This is important because she showed stiffness in certain areas, imbalances, and it's important to integrate stretching in with any resistance training program. To start, I had my client warm up on the elliptical machine for 5 minutes. She has the injury to her sesamoid on her foot, so I was careful to pick an aerobic warm-up that would not irritate that. After 5 minutes, I had her then go through basic upper body stretches, windmill, shoulder stretches, the neck stretch, reading book stretch, praying stretch, and the cat-cow. I wanted her to know these right off the bat for warm-up stretching so that she could integrate them in after her first few exercises and at the end of her exercises. And I picked the exercises that would target the areas I noticed the most tightness in her. So after she warmed up and did a little 5 to 10 minute of stretching, I explained her first exercise, which was the seated cable row. By going over the printouts, showing her the movements without the machine, and pointing out the muscle groups and the proper and improper ways to perform this exercise. So now I'm going to show you the exercises and how I went over each one with her and any corrections that I made throughout the process. So enjoy! Here are the handouts that I handed out to my client. They instruct on the seated cable row, the core trunk flexion, the core stretches, the 4 points of posture, the body weight squat, the lower body stretches, and also I gave her the printout on the 4 C's. So to start, I had her do the 5 to 10 minutes of warming up on the elliptical machine. And then we went into instructing her on her stretches, the windmill, the neck stretch, side to side, and then back and forth. And the shoulder stretch. It's important with the shoulder stretch to make sure that your shoulder is down at a more of a 45-degree angle. Otherwise, you can irritate your shoulder blade. And then I showed her the cat-cow stretch. And after we went through all the stretches, and then we started to look at the handouts I gave her to go over the first exercise. The first exercise I chose for my client was the seated cable row. I chose this exercise because it is a beginner exercise on the NPI training matrix. The seated cable row is an isolated exercise that targets the middle and upper back. This can be performed on any pulley cable machine with bench and double cable attachment. It's important to use the double cable rope attachment so that your hands can be at the correct width. This exercise can also be done with resistance tubing attached to a solid anchor, so long as it's at the proper angle for your arms when reached out. The cable does not want to start too low. To teach this specific exercise movement, I started by explaining the exercise and what muscles it was targeting by having her look at the handouts I made for her. Then I began to show her through the movements while standing before moving on to the machine. This is so that she will begin to develop a basic understanding of what the movements feel like and what some of the mistakes are that can be made during this movement. Some of the common mistakes are the elbow moving past the body in the concentric phase of the exercise. Here I pointed out on her the different muscles she is going to feel engage. I explained the importance of sitting tall, not looking down, engaging the core, and retracting the shoulder blades through each movement. To keep the elbows in at the side and to not let them go past the body. With each retraction, the elbows are to form a 90-degree angle. Often individuals will perform this exercise incorrectly by having their elbows too far away from their bodies, letting their elbows move far beyond their body, and not forming a 90-degree angle. Often people will also look down and lean their body forward at an angle out from their center of gravity and out of proper alignment. It is important that the cable doesn't start too low because that can cause friction in the shoulder blades. The knee and hips should form a 90-degree angle, and the elbows should form a 90-degree angle. And the shoulders should remain level, also forming a 90-degree angle. It is very important to keep proper posture throughout this movement to realign any postural issues and to engage the right muscles. It is also important to make sure you are not letting the weight pull your shoulders forward, or that your whole body isn't leaning forward or backwards during any phase of the movement. The upper torso is to stay in a fixed, straight position, forming a 90-degree angle at the hips. During each phase of this exercise, protraction and retraction is important to focus on the body being in alignment, following the 4 points of posture with the center of gravity falling, so the ears, shoulders, and hips all form a straight line. The areas I palpated and pointed out to her in the diagrams were the primary muscle groups that are being focused on here, and that's the trapezius, latissimus dorsi, the erector spinae, rear deltoids, biceps brachii, and forearm flexors. During this exercise, I continuously use the NPI points of evaluation and NPI grading system to evaluate and monitor her body alignment and muscular coordination during the movement. I corrected her posture when I noticed her start to slip out of the position, and I also had to readjust the height of the machine because I noticed a muscular imbalance in her arms that was causing the angle of her retraction to be much less than 90 degrees. I pointed this out to her so she could focus on keeping her wrist down during the movement to form more of a 90-degree angle, and I also lowered the height of the machine just a little bit to help correct her posture. Additional exercises I would have my client perform that are around the same level as this one before introducing a more advanced exercise are the seated back row using a commercial machine, and the dumbbell trapezius shrug and back extensions on the floor or bench. Once she showed mastery in these exercise movements by being able to hold proper form while reaching 15 to 20 reps of 2 to 3 sets, I would then move her on to more advanced exercises for the upper body, such as frontal back pull down using a bar and the back extension on a stability ball. I then had her stretch before showing her the next exercise. And the second exercise I chose for my client was the core flexion. When it comes to core exercises, it is important that the exercise selected are specifically selected for the safety of that client, because there are so many aspects of the core that directly affect the spine. I didn't want to select anything too advanced that would affect her spine in any negative way, making sure that we start with a beginner core flexion exercise that will build up a stronger base for her to move on to more advanced exercises. Based off of the NPI exercising training matrix, I chose for her to start with this core flexion exercise, following the same steps I outlined earlier as to how I would instruct a new exercise to a client. I went over the exercise with her from the handouts, then showed her what muscles we're going to focus on engaging in this movement. And then I showed her myself how to perform the movement and how people typically may perform the exercise wrong. I then had her explain it back to me and get into the preparatory phase of the exercise where I could assist her with any corrections before she started the movement. The core flexion exercise targets upper, middle, and lower rectus abdominis area with some secondary muscle activation of external obliques, the transverse abdominis, and internal abdominal oblique. I corrected her knees. Often people will have their knees too far away from their body, having her bring them closer to her body. The major thing I noticed right away was the arch under her lumbar from the ground. This was an important correction because during this movement you want to have your transverse abdominis engaged so that your spine is flat against the ground so that I can't put my hand underneath. To engage the transverse abdominis, you can think about tilting your pelvis towards you, pressing your spine down to the ground, and closing that gap. Then, with engagement of the rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, and internal obliques, you can raise your shoulders, head, and neck off the ground about 4 inches above the ground, focusing more on isometric contraction rather than concentric. This means that you are not performing a full crunching motion. The movement is slightly, just a little bit, around 4 inches, and the head and neck stay in a fixed position, looking straight up above you on the ceiling, the elbows remaining out to the side. Often people will pull their elbows into their ears and tilt their head and neck forward. After correcting any postural issues in the preparatory phase, I had her proceed with the exercise movements focusing on the 4 C's. For safety purposes, it is very important not to pull your neck or pull your head forward in this movement. You want to keep your neck in a neutral and relaxed position. The strength isn't coming from the muscles in your neck, it is coming from your abdominals. You are not pulling yourself up by lifting on your head. Your arms are simply loosely by your ears. In fact, it might even help to not touch your head at all to prevent any pulling. Just hold your hands loosely near your ears. The areas I palpated on her so she could feel the muscle engagement were the rectus abdominis, upper, lower, and middle. During each movement, I continuously monitor her based off the NPI grading system to evaluate and monitor her body alignment and make corrections. With this exercise movement, it is important for her to focus on form and muscle engagement to eventually reach up to 50 reps. To start, I would have her focus on reaching 20 to 25 repetitions and work her way up to 50 before advancing her on to any new exercise movement like rotation. Then I would have her move on to trunk rotation, and from there move on to trunk rotation with 1 foot off the ground. And I would want her to be able to reach 50 rotations on each side plus the 50 trunk flexions before moving on to any further advanced exercise like the trunk flexion on stability ball or trunk rotation on stability ball. After stretching, the third exercise I picked for my client was the lower body exercise, the body weight squat. Again, I wanted to start her with an exercise that is for a beginner based on the NPI training matrix to establish a strong base and work her way up to more advanced exercises from there. The body weight squat is one of the first exercises in the sequence of lower body exercises that you would want to teach a client to do correctly. It is performed by holding onto a stable surface to ensure proper posture throughout the motion. It is important to establish the proper posture of a squat this way so that the body develops and will be ready for more advanced movements. The primary and secondary muscle activated in the squat are the quadriceps and the adductor magnus and gluteus maximus and the soleus. When teaching this exercise movement, first I explain the main points to focus on during the preparatory, central, and terminal phase of the exercise. It is important to focus on the 4 points of posture and make sure the body is in proper alignment and in good line of gravity. That the head, shoulders, and hip joint are all in nice alignment, and the hip, shoulder, and ankle joint form a 90-degree angle. It is important to hold your head tall, look forward, not down, and engage the abdominals to hold proper posture throughout the movement. Your hands should be at a 45-degree angle from your shoulders. Here, her hands are a little too high and should have been corrected. Feet are to be the client's hip width apart, toes pointing forward. Hips are to be equal in alignment, feet equal in alignment, and the knees don't move in or out during the movement. Most often, people perform this exercise incorrectly by shifting their knees too far over their ankle joint, and when in the lifting motion, tilting the pelvis forward. Often people will lower too low past the 90-degree mark of the ankles at the knees, and this causes the pelvis to roll underneath them, causing undue stress to the lumbar spine. During the exercise, I evaluate her posture and grade her on her ability to hold the correct posture based on the NPI points of evaluation grading system. And once she is able to reach 2 to 3 sets of 20 reps while still in proper alignment and form, I would then feel comfortable to move her on to more advanced exercises such as the single leg hip extension and a body weight squat on a commercial machine. After her third exercise, I went over some lower body stretches with her, and that sums up the 3 exercises that I started her out on. The seated cable row, the core trunk flexion, and the body weight squat. Remembering the 4 C's and 4 points of posture.